A gun was pointed at a female doctor inside a frozen field clinic, and in that moment, silence became more dangerous than the trigger. A Navy SEAL stood still, reading the room like a battlefield, facing a choice: remain safe in silence or step into danger to protect a doctor saving a life. If you were in his place, what would you choose? Let us know in the comments. And if this story touches you, like the video and subscribe to the channel. This is not just a story about violence. It's a story about faith, instinct, and choosing what is right. The snow that morning was thin and clean, the kind that reflected light instead of swallowing it. Northern winters could be cruel, but this one had offered a rare mercy: clear skies, dry cold, and silence. Aiden Cross walked the forest trail with long, even strides, his boots pressing shallow prints into the white. At 35, he moved with the economy of someone whose body had learned discipline long before comfort. He stood just over 6 feet tall, his frame lean and compact, built for endurance rather than display. The tactical combat shirt he wore, olive gray, faded from years of washing and weather hung loose at the shoulders. The fabric softened by time. The cuffs were worn thin. His combat pants, brown-green and scuffed at the knees, sat comfortably on his hips, their cargo pockets sagging slightly from habitual use. Nothing about him looked new. Nothing about him looked accidental. His face was clean-shaven, jawline square and unhidden, cheekbones sharp under skin, weathered by wind and cold. His dark brown hair was cut short in a military style, grown just a fraction longer than regulation, as if he'd allowed himself that one quiet rebellion. His eyes, gray-green, steady, took in the forest without judgment. They were the eyes of a man who had seen enough violence to no longer need to prove anything. At his side moved Coda. The German Shepherd was large, male, and fully grown, his black and tan coat thick against the cold. His back was a deep sable black, fading into warm gold along his chest and legs. His ears stood tall and alert, never relaxed, even in moments of calm. His amber eyes missed little. Coda did not walk like a pet. He moved like a partner, pacing half a step ahead or behind, depending on the terrain. There was no leash tension between them, only understanding. They had walked this trail dozens of times since Aiden had come north on rotational leave. The routine mattered. It gave the mind something steady to hold when the rest of life felt suspended. Halfway down the path, Coda slowed. It wasn't dramatic. No bark, no sudden panic. Just a hesitation, a subtle shortening of stride. His ears angled forward. His head dipped, nose sweeping low through the cold air. Aiden noticed immediately. "What is it?" he murmured, more habit than expectation. Coda's body stiffened. His tail dropped. A low sound vibrated in his chest, not a growl meant to threaten, but one meant to warn. Then it happened. Coda lunged back with a sharp yelp, weight collapsing onto his front legs. His hind leg dragged behind him, blood blooming red against the white snow far too fast. Aiden was moving before the sound fully left the dog's throat. He dropped to one knee, hands already on Coda, calm and precise. The wound was deep metal, had torn through muscle, jagged and rusted. A trap remnant, old hunting wire, or discarded debris half buried beneath fresh snowfall. The kind of thing no one noticed until it was too late. "Easy," Aiden said quietly, his voice low, steady. "I've got you." Coda's breath came fast, his body trembling, not from fear, but from shock and pain. He tried to rise again, instinct pushing him forward, even as his leg failed him. "Stay," Aiden said, firm now. Coda obeyed. Aiden pressed his gloved hand hard against the wound, applying pressure with controlled force. He tore a strip from the hem of his shirt without hesitation and bound it tight, slowing the blood. His movements were efficient, practiced. This was not his first emergency. It wasn't even his first like this, but it was the first time it had been Coda. Aiden's jaw tightened. He knew the limits of field treatment. This needed a doctor. That was when the sound of an engine broke the quiet. A pickup truck approached from the road beyond the trees, tires crunching softly over ice. It slowed when it saw them, then stopped a short distance away. The driver stepped out. She was in her early 30s, average height, slim but sturdy, dressed in practical winter clothing. Her brown hair was pulled back into a low ponytail, strands already escaping in the cold wind. Her face was pale, lightly freckled, eyes sharp and observant. She carried herself with the alert posture of someone used to walking into emergencies rather than away from them. "I'm a doctor," she said, before Aiden could speak. Her voice was calm, unhurried. "Is he hurt?" Aiden looked up. "Yes." She knelt beside Coda without asking permission, careful not to crowd him. "I'm Ilara Wynn," she said. "Emergency medicine, not a vet, but I can stop this from getting worse." Her hands were steady as she examined the wound, fingers gentle but confident. Coda watched her closely, muscles taut, ready to pull away if needed. Ilara met his gaze without flinching, her movement slow and deliberate. "It's bad," she said after a moment, "but not catastrophic. Muscle damage. High risk of infection if we don't clean and monitor it." She looked at Aiden. "There's a small military aid station near the lake. I'm headed there now to cover a shift. They'll have better supplies." Aiden nodded once. He trusted her. As Ilara finished rebandaging the wound, Coda's ears suddenly flattened. His head lifted, eyes locked past the trees. A vehicle passed on the distant road, dark, unfamiliar. Coda let out a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through his chest, nothing like the whine of pain he'd made earlier. Ilara paused. "Is he always like that?" "No," Aiden said. The sound faded, the vehicle disappeared. Coda settled again, but his eyes stayed alert. Aiden stored the moment away, instinct telling him it mattered, even if he didn't yet know why. As Ilara stood and brushed snow from her knees, Coda shifted unexpectedly, dragging himself forward just enough to press his body between Aiden and the direction the vehicle had gone. Not protectively, deliberately. Aiden felt it then, a familiar tightening in his chest. The same one he'd felt seconds before things went wrong in places far from this quiet forest. Coda wasn't reacting to pain. He was reacting to something that had already passed and might return. They loaded Coda carefully into the back of Ilara's truck, padding him with blankets. He endured it silently, eyes never leaving the tree line as they drove. The lake appeared through the trees, soon after wide and frozen, reflecting the pale blue sky. The aid station sat near its edge, low and unassuming, more functional than imposing. Aiden followed Alara inside, carrying Coda with controlled strength. The building smelled of disinfectant and cold metal. This was supposed to be routine. Just a wound. Just help. But as the door closed behind them, Aiden felt the same thing he always did before the calm shattered. The sense that something had already started moving and that it didn't care whether they were ready or not. The field clinic sat at the edge of the frozen lake like a quiet promise low, rectangular, built more for function than comfort. Its exterior was a muted gray, meant to disappear against winter rather than stand out. Snow had gathered along the base of the walls, undisturbed except for a single cleared path leading to the entrance. Inside, the air was warm but spare. The smell of antiseptic mixed with metal and old heating pipes. It was the kind of place that didn't invite people in. It waited for them. Captain, Hazel Grant stood near the intake desk when Aiden carried Coda through the door. Hazel was in her early 40s, tall for a woman, with a lean, disciplined build that spoke of years in uniform. Her dark blonde hair was cut short and practical, brushed straight back from a face lined not by age, but by habit, squinting into wind, reading people quickly, making decisions without hesitation. Her skin was pale, weathered slightly around the eyes, and her expression was guarded in a way that came from responsibility rather than suspicion alone. She took in the scene in seconds. The injured dog, the man carrying him, the way the man moved. "Put him on the table," Hazel said, voice level, authoritative without being loud. "Careful with the leg." Aiden did as told, lowering Coda onto the stainless steel examination table. Coda let out a low, breathy sound, not quite a whine, more a protest against being still. Hazel's eyes flicked to Aiden's hands, then to his posture. She noticed the way he positioned himself between the table and the door without seeming to. She noticed the boots, the faded tactical shirt, the old military watch on his wrist. "You're not local," she said. "No," Aiden replied. Dr. Alara Wynn stepped in beside them, pulling on gloves. "He stepped on buried metal in the forest. I stabilized him, but the wound needs monitoring." Hazel nodded once. "We'll take it from here." She turned to Aiden. "You can wait outside." Aiden didn't argue. He simply looked at Coda. Coda met his gaze, ears half raised, eyes alert despite the pain. "I'll be right there," Aiden said quietly. Coda didn't relax, but he didn't resist either. Hazel watched that exchange closely before turning back to the table. The clinic staff moved efficiently. A young medic named Liam Carter assisted Hazel mid-20s, freckled, with sandy hair tucked under his cap. He moved quickly, but with a slight edge of nervous energy, the kind that came from knowing he was competent, but still new enough to feel watched. They cleaned the wound thoroughly, flushing it until the water ran clear. Hazel's hands were steady, methodical. "Soft tissue damage," she said. "No fracture, high infection risk." Alara leaned closer, studying the injury. "Agreed. He'll need antibiotics and observation." Hazel glanced at her. "You said you're ER." "Yes, not veterinary." "No," Alara said evenly. "But trauma is trauma. The body doesn't care who the patient is." Hazel held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough." Coda endured the treatment without snapping or thrashing, though his muscles stayed tense. When Liam reached too suddenly toward the wound, Coda's head snapped up, teeth flashing, not biting, but warning. Aiden shifted instinctively from the corner. "I've got him," Ilara said softly, placing a steady hand on Coda's shoulder. Coda's breathing slowed. He watched her, then settled. Hazel noticed that too. Aiden remained near the wall, silent, observing. This place had the feel of something temporary people passing through, problems arriving without notice. He'd seen enough outposts like it to know how quickly they could turn from quiet to chaos. When the front door opened again, he felt it before he saw it. Two men entered, stamping snow from their boots. They wore civilian jackets, heavy and plain. One was tall and broad-shouldered, his beard trimmed but uneven, eyes sharp beneath a knit cap. The other was shorter, thinner, his movements quick and restless, gaze darting around the room as if cataloging exits. "Afternoon," the taller one said. His voice was friendly, practiced. "We were told you might have antibiotics. Our camp's a ways out." Hazel stepped forward. "We're a military aid station. Supplies are limited." The man smiled. "Of course, we don't need much." Aiden watched from the side, eyes unfocused, listening. The shorter man leaned casually against the counter, fingers tapping once, twice. His eyes lingered too long on the hallway, leading deeper into the clinic. "How many of you are on shift today?" he asked lightly. Hazel's posture tightened a fraction. "Enough." Coda lifted his head. The fur along his spine rose slowly, deliberately. A low rumble grew in his chest, not loud enough to alarm, but impossible to ignore. Ilara felt it before she heard it. Her stomach tightened. "He doesn't usually react like that," she said, glancing at Hazel. Hazel's gaze flicked between the men and the dog. "You'll need to come back later," she said firmly. "We're occupied." The taller man raised his hand slightly. "No trouble. Just thought we'd ask." They turned and left without argument. The door closed behind them. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Hazel exhaled slowly. "That was odd," Ilara nodded. "Their questions were specific." Hazel looked toward Aiden. "You noticed it too." Aiden met her gaze. "They weren't here for medicine." Hazel studied him more closely now. "And you are?" "Aiden, that's not what I meant." Aiden didn't answer. Hazel didn't press yet. She turned to Liam. "Lock the side entrance. Low-level alert?" "Yes, ma'am." As Liam moved away, Hazel lowered her voice. "We don't raise alarms without cause, but we don't ignore instincts either." Her eyes went to Coda, who had settled again but remained alert. "That dog's instincts," Hazel added, "might be better than ours." A few minutes later, as Hazel updated logs and Ilara checked vitals, Coda suddenly turned his head toward the far wall. Not the door, not the windows, the wall. He let out a short, sharp huff, ears pinned back, eyes fixed on nothing the others could see. Aiden felt the hairs rise on his arms. Because Coda wasn't reacting to sound. He was reacting to absence. The rest of the hour passed in a strange, stretched quiet. Hazel increased security in subtle ways, checking locks, repositioning a radio, moving supplies out of plain sight. Nothing overt, nothing that would panic the staff. Ilara stayed with Coda, monitoring his temperature, checking the wound every few minutes. She spoke to him softly, not in the exaggerated tone people used with pets, but in the steady cadence of someone accustomed to patients who couldn't answer back. "You're doing well," she murmured. "Stay with me." Coda's tail thumped weakly once. Aiden watched her work, noting the way she kept her hand steady, even when her shoulders betrayed tension. She knew something was off. She didn't know what yet, but she was listening. Hazel joined Aiden near the window overlooking the lake. The ice stretched white and endless, broken only by a few dark cracks near the shore. "You military?" Hazel asked. Aiden didn't look at her. "Yes." "Still active?" "Sometimes." Hazel gave a short, humorless smile. "Figures." She grew serious again. "If this place turns ugly, I need to know where you stand." Aiden turned to face her fully now. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "I stand where people don't get hurt." Hazel studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "That'll do." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying sound across the frozen lake, a distant engine. Too far to place. Coda lifted his head again. This time, he didn't growl. He simply watched. The clinic lights hummed softly overhead. Everything appeared normal, routine, and yet, beneath it all, something felt misaligned, like a step taken half a second too late. Aiden rested his hand briefly against Coda's neck, feeling the steady warmth there. Whatever was coming, it wasn't lost. It was finding its way. The first sound was not a gunshot. It was a sharp, metallic crack from the parking lot. Something small but deliberate, like a firecracker tossed against ice. The noise echoed across the frozen lake and bounced back toward the clinic walls. Hazel Grant looked up from the desk instantly. Before anyone could speak, the front door burst inward. Cold air flooded the room, followed by men. They moved fast, practiced, not reckless controlled. 3 of them, then 4. Dark winter jackets, rifles raised but steady, fingers disciplined on triggers. Their boots tracked snow across the clean floor, leaving wet, ugly marks that spread like stains. "Down, everyone down." The voice was calm, accented but fluent. It carried authority without shouting. Aiden Cross felt his body shift before his mind finished processing. He lowered himself slowly, hands visible, eyes already mapping angles, doors, blind spots, the way each man held his weapon. None of them were amateurs. Elara froze for half a heartbeat, just long enough to register the wrongness of guns in a clinic, then knelt beside the nearest gurney as ordered, hands trembling only slightly. Hazel stepped forward half a pace. "This is a military medical facility." A rifle swung toward her chest. "So you should understand," the voice replied. The speaker stepped into view. Kareem Nadir. He was taller than most in the room, broad-shouldered, despite the way he leaned subtly to one side. His beard was thick but uneven, dark hair flecked with gray at the temples. His face was sharp, high cheekbones, a narrow nose, and his eyes were unsettlingly alive for a man bleeding through his jacket. A dark stain spread across his left side, soaking into the fabric, each breath costing him effort. When he spoke, it was measured, deliberate, as if every word mattered. Some men were loud to be feared. Kareem was quiet. Behind him, another man stumbled forward. Dr. Mason Rourke. Mason looked out of place in every possible way. Early 40s, pale, with thinning brown hair plastered to his forehead by sweat. He wore civilian clothes under a borrowed tactical vest that didn't quite fit, the straps pulling awkwardly against his narrow frame. His eyes darted constantly from Kareem to the guns to the staff, never settling. He carried a medical bag with both hands like a shield. "Please," Mason said quickly, voice strained, "just do what they say." Kareem glanced back at him with faint irritation. "Save your breath, doctor. You'll need it." He turned his attention to Elara. "You," he said. "You're a physician." Elara swallowed, then nodded. "Emergency medicine." "Good." Kareem gestured weakly to his side. You're going to keep me alive." Hazel opened her mouth to protest. Kareem didn't look at her. "If anyone here touches a radio," he continued calmly, "or tries to be a hero, the next sound you hear won't be small." One of the gunmen locked the doors. The clinic was sealed. They moved Kareem onto the central examination table, pushing aside equipment without care. Blood dripped onto the floor in slow, heavy drops. Alara stepped closer, forcing her hands to steady. "We need to assess you," she said. "Vitals, airway, we don't know." "Do not waste time," Kareem interrupted. His breath hitched. "Fix the bleeding." Mason was already opening his bag, hands shaking. "We should start fluids. Now, no delays." Ilara shot him a sharp look. "Not without knowing where the bleeding is, if it's internal." "We don't have that luxury," Mason hissed under his breath. "He dies. We all die." Their eyes met. Ilara saw fear there, not cowardice, but survival, stripped of dignity. Mason had learned to function in war zones by obeying whoever held the gun. She had learned something else. "Pressure first," she said firmly. "Oxygen, then imaging." Kareem watched the exchange with interest. "I like you," he said to Ilara. "You don't rush." Then his gaze flicked to Mason. "And you." His smile thinned. "You rush because you're afraid." Mason flinched. Aiden remained seated against the wall, wrists zip-tied loosely in front of him. He tested the tension once enough, give to matter later. He studied Kareem's men. One was young, early 20s, clean-shaven, jaw tight too tight. His rifle shook almost imperceptibly when Coda's distant barking echoed from the back of the clinic. Another was older, scarred, eyes dull, professional, the kind who wouldn't hesitate. The third watched Aiden too closely. Aiden returned the look with empty calm. Coda was locked in the storage room down the hall. The space was small, cluttered with crates and folded cots. Coda paced despite the pain in his leg, nails scraping against concrete. He could hear raised voices, smell blood, fear, anger. He barked once, then again. A gunman cursed and kicked the door. "Shut that thing up!" Coda answered with a low, resonant growl that vibrated through the thin wall. Aiden heard it, and so did Kareem. "Interesting," Kareem murmured. "Even wounded, it does not submit." As Alara leaned in to check Kareem's breathing, Coda's barking stopped abruptly, too abruptly. The sudden silence pressed into the room like a held breath. Aiden's spine stiffened. Dogs didn't go quiet like that unless they were listening to something humans couldn't hear yet. Alara placed the stethoscope against Kareem's chest. His lungs sounded uneven, shallow. There was a wet quality to each inhale that made her stomach tighten. "You've got compromised breathing," she said, "possibly internal bleeding pressing on the lung." Mason shook his head rapidly. "No time for that. We push fluids, stabilize, then move." "That could kill him faster," Ilara shot back. Kareem raised a hand weakly. "Enough." He looked between them. "Dr. Rourke, you will assist. Dr. Wynne, you will lead." Mason stared at him. "That's—" Kareem's eyes hardened. "I am bleeding. I am still deciding who lives." Mason fell silent. Alara met Kareem's gaze. "If you want to live, you let me do this right." For a moment, Kareem studied her as if she were a puzzle. Then he nodded. "Proceed." Alara moved quickly, no oxygen mask, careful pressure, calling out vitals. Hazel assisted where she could under watchful guns, her jaw set with controlled fury. Aiden tracked every shift of weight. every lapse in attention. One gunman wiped sweat from his brow. Another adjusted his grip. Time stretched. Kareem's breathing worsened, each inhale shallow and labored. "Pressure's dropping," Mason said, voice cracking. Alara didn't answer immediately. She listened again, felt the asymmetry. The body telling the truth before machines could. "This isn't just blood loss," she said quietly. "There's pressure building. If we rush fluids." Kareem's face tightened with pain. "Then do what you must." Aiden saw it then, not fear in Kareem, but acceptance. The kind that came from a man who had stared at death often enough to recognize its approach. From the back of the clinic, a single sharp scrape echoed, metal on concrete. Coda, still unseen, still waiting. The clinic held its breath, balanced on a thin line between healing and violence, and no one yet knew which way it would fall. The room had grown smaller, not physically, but in the way fear compressed air, narrowed options, stripped everything down to breath, blood, and time. Alara stood at the examination table, her gloved hands hovering just above Kareem Nadir's chest. She could feel it, without touching, the resistance in the rise of his ribs, the uneven pull of each breath. His skin had taken on a grayish undertone now, sweat beading along his temples despite the cold. "This isn't simple blood loss," she said, voice firm but controlled. "Your lung isn't expanding properly." Dr. Mason Rourke shook his head sharply. His face was pale, eyes rimmed red, a vein pulsing at his temple. "We don't have imaging. We don't have a surgical suite. We don't have time." Alara turned to face him fully. "Then we have even less room for mistakes." Mason's hands tightened around a syringe. "If we don't push fluids aggressively, he crashes. If you push fluids into a chest under pressure," Alara shot back, "you make the collapse faster." Kareem listened, eyes half-lidded, breath rasping. He looked more like a man underwater than one lying on a table, fighting pressure from all sides. One of the gunmen stepped closer, impatient. He was broad and thick-necked, his face scarred along the jaw, beard cropped short. His rifle came up, barrel hovering inches from Alara's shoulder. "Enough talking," he growled. "Do what the doctor says." Alara didn't flinch. She looked at the barrel, then at Kareem. "Which doctor?" The gunman's finger tightened. Aiden Cross felt his muscles coil. He was still seated against the wall, wrists bound, posture deceptively relaxed. But his eyes were locked on the gunman's stance. The angle of the weapon, the way his weight leaned forward, overcommitted. Then Coda roared, not a bark, a deep, full-throated warning that tore through the clinic from the storage room down the hall. The sound was raw, feral, powerful enough to make the lights seem to vibrate. The gunman jerked, startled, swinging his rifle toward the hallway. "Shut that damn dog up!" But Coda didn't stop. The growl shifted, sharpened, focused on something specific. Alara's eyes widened. She caught it then, the scent, faint but unmistakable beneath antiseptic and blood. A metallic tang, heat. Her gaze snapped to the far side of the room. One of the men standing near the supply cabinets wore scrubs. Too clean, too loose. His posture was wrong tense in the shoulders, hands hidden in the pockets of his jacket. Coda's growl tracked him. "Wait," Alara said. "That one!" The man moved. Too fast. Aiden moved faster. He surged up from the floor in one fluid motion, snapping the zip ties against the corner of the metal chair as he rose. They tore apart with a dull crack. The man in scrubs reached inside his jacket. Aiden was already there. He drove his shoulder into the man's chest, slamming him into the cabinets with bone-jarring force. The hidden weapon, a compact pistol, clattered across the floor. The gunman shouted. Rifles swung. Aiden didn't strike again. He twisted the man's arm behind his back, using leverage, not brute force. There was a sharp cry as the joint locked. Aiden kicked the pistol away and shoved the man down hard, boot on his shoulder. Don't move, Aiden said quietly. The room froze. Kareem stared at the scene, chest heaving. He took in the broken ties on Aiden's wrists, the speed of the takedown, the way the other gunmen hesitated, not because they were confused, but because they understood. Control had shifted, not completely, but enough. The man on the floor groaned. He was younger up close, late 20s, narrow face, eyes wild with panic. His scrubs hid a thin vest beneath, and when he turned his head, Alara caught a glimpse of a small device taped beneath the fabric. Explosive residue. Hazel Grant stepped forward, voice sharp. He's carrying incendiary components. Kareem closed his eyes for a brief second. When he opened them again, they were clear. So, he said hoarsely, this place was never just shelter. No one answered. Kareem looked at Aiden, then at Alara, then at the gunman who had nearly pulled the trigger. Lower your weapons, Kareem ordered. The hesitation lasted a fraction of a second. Then rifles dropped just enough. Aiden stepped on her back, hands visible again. But he did not return to the floor. Coda went silent, not relaxed, watching. As Alara knelt again beside Kareem, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. With the weapons lowered, with the shouting stopped, with the room finally quiet, Coda began to whine, softly, not in fear, in urgency, the kind of sound animals made when time was almost gone. Alara, Hazel said under her breath. What is it? Alara pressed her stethoscope to Kareem's chest again. The sound on the left was faint. On the right, almost nothing. Her jaw tightened. Pressure's increasing, she said. His lung is being compressed. If we don't relieve it, he'll arrest. Mason stared at her. You can't be sure. I am, Alara replied. Kareem met her gaze. If you're wrong. Alara didn't hesitate. Then I live with it. If we don't act, you don't. Silence fell again. Kareem nodded once. Do it. Mason stepped back, hands trembling. This is insane. Alara looked at him, not unkindly. No, this is medicine without permission. Hazel moved to Alara's side. You'll have cover. Aiden stepped forward, positioning himself between Alara and the gunman, his stance open but immovable. No one interrupts, he said calmly. 10 seconds. Kareem raised a hand weakly. You heard him. Alara closed her eyes briefly, grounding herself. 10 seconds. She listened. Not to voices, to the body. She marked the intercostal space, measured with her fingers, ignoring the shake in her hands. When she opened her eyes again, they were steady. She worked quickly, clean, precise, decisive. As the pressure released, Kareem gasped sharply, then drew a deeper breath than he had since arriving. The change was immediate. Color returned, slowly, painfully. Mason stared in disbelief. Kareem lay back, breathing still labored, but no longer drowning. He let out a low, broken laugh. Seems, he said between breaths, you were right. Alara exhaled shakily, only now feeling the weight of what she'd done. Hazel let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Aiden glanced toward the storage room. "Coda," he called quietly. The dog answered with a single bark, short, strong, alive. The clinic was still occupied. The danger was not over, but something fundamental had changed. Kareem Nadir no longer saw himself as the man in control. He saw himself as the man on the table, alive only because someone had refused to rush. And that realization, more than any weapon, altered the balance in the room. The clinic did not exhale when Kareem's breathing improved. It only shifted. The tension changed shape, no longer explosive, but brittle, like ice that had cracked and might give way at any moment. The rifles were still there. The men were still armed, and Kareem Nadir was still the reason they were trapped in this place, between forest and frozen lake. Ilara wiped her gloves against a sterile towel, aware of how badly her hands wanted to shake now that the immediate crisis had eased. She forced herself to slow down. Panic came later. Precision came now. Kareem lay back on the table, oxygen mask fogging faintly with each breath. His eyes tracked her movements, sharper than before. Pain had carved lines into his face, but there was something else there now. Attention. "How long," he asked, voice rough, "did that buy me?" Ilara didn't answer right away. She checked the monitor, listened again, adjusted the flow. "Minutes," she said honestly. "Maybe an hour, not more." Mason Rourke let out a sharp breath. "That's not enough. We don't have surgical backup. We don't have imaging. If we push another invasive procedure here, you're thinking about liability," Ilara said quietly. "I'm thinking about survival," Mason snapped. His voice cracked, and he looked away, ashamed of it. "Mine, yours." Kareem watched them both, eyes narrowing slightly. "And what are you thinking, doctor?" Ilara met his gaze. "I'm thinking that if we don't act again, you die slowly instead of quickly." One of the gunmen shifted his weight. The nervous one, the youngest, kept glancing toward the windows, fingers tight around his rifle. Sweat darkened the collar of his jacket despite the cold. Aiden Cross noticed. He had moved closer to the table without anyone telling him to. Not aggressively, just enough that his presence changed the geometry of the room. He stood with his hands relaxed at his sides, shoulders loose, posture open, but ready. Coda lay beside his left leg now, released from the storage room at Kareem's order. The dog's injured leg was wrapped thickly, but he barely acknowledged it. His body was aligned with Aiden's, head low, ears half back, eyes fixed on the same gunman Aiden was watching. Ilara took a breath. "There's another procedure we can try," she said. "It's risky. It requires absolute stillness. 10 seconds of silence. No interruptions." Mason turned on her. "You can't be serious. In this environment, with guns pointed at us?" "I am serious," Ilara replied, "because the alternative is waiting until his body fails." Kareem closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, his gaze moved not to Mason, not to the gunman, but to Aiden. "And you?" Kareem asked. "What do you think, soldier?" Aiden didn't answer immediately. He studied Kareem's face, the calculated calm, the intelligence, the fear buried deep enough that most people missed it. Then he looked at the gunmen, one by one, measured their breathing, their fatigue, their doubt. Finally, he spoke. "If you die here," Aiden said evenly, "no one in this room gets out of this forest. Not your men, not us, not him." He nodded toward Mason. "Let her work." The words landed hard. The youngest gunman swallowed. Another shifted his grip, then loosened it. Kareem stared at Aiden for a long moment. Then he laughed softly, a sound more surprised than amused. "You speak as if you're certain," Kareem said. "I am," Aiden replied. Kareem raised a hand slowly. "Lower the weapons." This time, there was no hesitation. Rifles dipped. Shoulders eased. Kareem turned back to Alara. "You have your 10 seconds." Alara felt the weight of it settle over her. 10 seconds was nothing. 10 seconds was everything. She prepared the equipment with deliberate care, blocking out the room, the men, the weapons. She focused on the body in front of her. The way Kareem's chest rose, the slight tremor in his hands, the signal his physiology was sending even as his mouth stayed silent. Mason hovered at the edge, torn between instinct and fear. If this goes wrong, Alara didn't look at him. If it goes right, he lives. She positioned herself, marked the spot again, adjusted the angle, her breath caught for a fraction of a second. Then doubt crept in. What if Mason was right? What if she was pushing too far, asking too much of a body already breaking? Her eyes flicked just once toward the nearest rifle. Aiden noticed. He leaned in slightly, close enough that only she could hear him. "Look at the signal," he said quietly, "not the guns." The words grounded her. She nodded once. 10 seconds, Ilara said aloud. The room fell silent, and even the wind outside seemed to pause. She moved. The procedure demanded precision, not speed. Her hands worked by memory and training, guided by the feedback beneath her fingers. She listened, not with her ears alone, but with her entire focus tuned to resistance, release, change. At second 7, her pulse spiked. At second 9, Kareem gasped sharply. At second 10, the pressure eased, not dramatically, not miraculously, but enough. Ilara stepped back, chest heaving. She checked the monitor again, then again. The numbers stabilized, inching towards something survivable. Mason stared, stunned. "I'll be damned." Kareem lay still, breathing slower now, deeper. His eyes searched Ilara's face, then Aiden's. "You chose," he said hoarsely. "Both of you." Ilara removed her gloves with shaking hands. "You're not out of danger," she said. "You need a higher-level facility, now." Kareem nodded faintly. "We'll move." One of the gunmen frowned. "Boss?" Kareem silenced him with a glance. "We move." As preparations began, Coda suddenly stood. His ears snapped forward, body going rigid, not at the gunman, not at the door, but toward the lake-facing windows. Aiden followed his gaze. Far across the ice, something dark was moving. Slow, deliberate, and coming closer. The clinic buzzed with controlled urgency. Hazel coordinated supplies with quiet authority. Her earlier suspicion replaced by sharp focus. She met Aiden's eyes briefly and gave a small nod acknowledgement. Not thanks. Ilara packed what little they could for transport, her mind already racing ahead to contingencies. Kareem's men moved with less aggression now, more purpose. The dynamic had shifted. Mason approached Ilara, voice low. "I was wrong," he said, "about rushing." Ilara glanced at him. "Fear makes liars of us all." He nodded, accepting that. Aiden stayed near Kareem, not guarding watching. Coda remained pressed against his leg, gaze never leaving the window. The dark shape on the ice resolved slowly into vehicles, plural. Headlights cut across the frozen lake. Faint but unmistakable. Aiden's jaw tightened. Kareem noticed. "You see something?" "Yeah," Aiden said, "and so will everyone else soon." Kareem closed his eyes briefly. "Seems my problems are catching up." Alara looked between them. "Whoever they are, you're not ready to move yet." Kareem's lips curved into a tired smile. "Then I suppose we'll find out who wants me alive more." Outside, the sound of engines grew clearer. Inside, the clinic held its fragile, order tenuous, temporary, bought by 10 seconds of courage and the willingness to listen when it mattered. Alara stood at the table, steady again. Aiden rested a hand on Coda's neck, feeling the low vibration of the dog's alert growl begin. Whatever was coming across the ice, it was not chance. And this place, this moment, was no longer neutral ground. The sound that arrived first was not sirens. It was rotors. Low at first, then steadily louder. The rhythm cutting through the cold air above the frozen lake. Snow lifted in thin spirals as the helicopters descended, their lights washing the white ground in hard flashes of blue and red. The takeover was over. The clinic doors opened under command now, not threat. Men and women in marked winter gear flooded the space with practiced efficiency. Rifles slung low, eyes sharp, movements clean. A rapid response unit, federal by the look of their insignia. Faces disciplined, voices clipped, no unnecessary words. Aiden Cross stepped back without being asked, hands visible, posture calm. He watched how the room reorganized itself when authority returned. How fear drained away but tension remained, reshaped into something colder. Kareem Nadir was transferred onto a reinforced gurney, restraints secured at wrists and ankles. He was conscious, pale, breathing steadily with assistance. 2 agents flanked him, their hands never leaving the rails. As he was wheeled toward the exit, Kareem turned his head just enough to look at Alara. "You did not ask who I was," he said quietly. Alara met his gaze without warmth or anger. "It wouldn't have changed my work." Kareem studied her, then nodded once. "That," he said, "is why you're dangerous." Then he was gone. Dr. Mason Rourke was escorted in the opposite direction. 2 investigators, one tall and broad, with close-cropped blonde hair, the other shorter, darker, with a narrow scar, cutting through his right eyebrow, guided him firmly, but without aggression. Mason's shoulders were hunched, his hands shaking as he spoke rapidly, trying to explain himself to anyone who would listen. No one was listening. Hazel Grant stood near the central desk, arms crossed, watching the controlled chaos with the expression of someone already anticipating the paperwork to come. When her eyes met Aiden's, she gave a slight nod. "Stay available," she said. "They'll want statements." Aiden inclined his head. "I'm not going anywhere." Coda lay near the far wall, his body stretched out on a blanket. His breathing was shallow but steady, his injured leg wrapped thickly. He hadn't relaxed since the helicopters arrived. His ears twitched at every footstep, his gaze fixed on the doorway as if something unfinished lingered beyond it. Alara knelt beside him. She pressed the back of her hand gently against his side. Too warm. Her brow furrowed. "Coda," she murmured. The dog shifted slightly, letting out a low, uncomfortable sound, not a growl, not a whine. His eyes were glassy now, unfocused in a way that made Alara's stomach tighten. She reached for the thermometer. The number climbed faster than she liked. His temperature's spiking, she said quietly to Aiden. Aiden crouched beside her, his presence instantly narrowing to the dog alone. Infection? Possibly, Alara replied, but this is fast, too fast. She carefully loosened the outer wrap around Coda's leg, her movements slow, deliberate. The wound looked worse than it had an hour earlier, angrier, darker around the edges. Alara inhaled sharply. That's not right. She adjusted the light and leaned closer, eyes narrowing, as she examined the injury. Beneath the swelling, something caught the glow, a faint metallic sheen, irregular, embedded deeper than she'd initially thought. Hold him steady, she said. Aiden placed one hand gently, but firmly on Coda's shoulder, the other near his chest. Easy, buddy, he murmured. Coda didn't resist. Alara used a sterile instrument to probe carefully. The tip contacted metal with a soft, unmistakable click. Her jaw set. She worked slowly, coaxing the object free. When it finally emerged, it was no ordinary shard. The fragment was narrow, serrated along one edge, treated with a dull, matte coating designed to resist corrosion. Too precise. Too intentional. Alara turned it in the light, her expression darkening. I've seen something like this before, she said softly. Not in animals. Aiden looked at the piece, then at her. What is it? A modified, pressure-triggered snare component, Alara replied. Military grade or close enough. Designed to maim, not kill. To slow movement. Force extraction. She met his eyes. This wasn't an accident. The implications settled heavily between them. Coda hadn't stumbled into random debris. He had triggered part of a system. An investigator approached, his boots quiet against the tile. He was in his late 30s, tall and angular, with sharp features and tired eyes that suggested too many nights like this. His name badge read Special Agent Thomas Hale. Dr. Wynne, Hale said evenly. We have a few questions. Alara straightened, wiping her hands. About Kareem? About your decisions, Hale replied. You saved a known terrorist. Alara didn't bristle. She didn't defend herself. She simply met his gaze. I treated a patient, she said. I don't choose who bleeds. Hale studied her for a moment, then nodded slightly. That's what I needed to hear. His eyes flicked to the metal fragment resting on the tray. What's that? Alara picked it up carefully. The reason this dog is dying faster than he should be. Hale leaned in, recognition flickering across his face. That's not civilian hardware. No, Alara agreed, and it didn't end up in the forest by chance. Hale exhaled slowly. Then we may have a bigger problem than we thought. As Hale turned away to speak into his radio, Coda's head lifted sharply. Despite the fever, despite the pain, his ears pricked forward, body tensing. Aiden followed his gaze to the open doorway, now empty, now quiet. Coda growled, not at a person, at the absence of one. The clinic began to empty as the response teams completed their sweep. Evidence bags were sealed, statements recorded. The hum of official procedure replaced the earlier chaos. Mason Rourke was escorted past Alara one last time. His eyes were red-rimmed, his mouth trembling as if he wanted to speak. He didn't. Alara watched him go without satisfaction or anger. Only sadness. Hazel approached quietly. They're sealing the area, she said. Forest, lake perimeter, all of it. Aiden nodded. They should. Hazel glanced at Coda. That dog just turned this from an incident into an investigation. Ilara's hands clenched. He already did more than that. Hale returned, his expression grim. We traced similar components to Kareem's supply chain, he said. The trap wasn't meant for wildlife. It was part of a forward staging system. Aiden's eyes hardened. Meaning? Meaning your dog disrupted something meant for someone else, Hale replied. Possibly a test run. Silence followed. Alara looked down at Coda, her throat tight. So he stepped on a future attack. Hale nodded once. Yes. Aiden rested his hand on Coda's neck, feeling the heat beneath the fur. The dog leaned into the touch, despite his vigilance, eyes never leaving the doorway. I'm staying, Aiden said. Hale looked at him. You're not obligated. I know, Aiden replied. But she is. He nodded toward Alara. Alara turned to him sharply. Aiden. There will be questions, Aiden continued. Press. Doubt. People who don't like how this ended. You shouldn't face that alone. Hale considered them both, then nodded. We won't object. Coda shifted, letting out a soft huff. His head lowered briefly, then lifted again, watchful. Alara knelt beside him once more, her voice barely above a whisper. You did your job, she said. Now let us do ours. Coda's tail thumped once against the floor. Outside, the wind moved across the lake, carrying with it the faint echo of rotors fading into the distance. The threat was contained, but not finished. And Coda, fevered, wounded, unwavering, seemed to know it. The morning Kareem Nadir left the field clinic, the snow was brighter than it had been in days. It reflected the sky in pale blue and silver, unbroken except where boots and tires had carved temporary scars. The helicopters were gone now. The lake lay still. What remained was the quiet that followed decisions made under pressure, quiet that did not mean peace, only distance from chaos. Kareem was wheeled out under armed escort, wrists cuffed, ankles restrained. His face was drawn, his beard flecked with gray now more visible, without blood masking it. He no longer looked like a commander in control of men and weapons. He looked like what he had always been beneath it all, a man whose body could fail, whose breath could be taken away. As they paused briefly at the threshold, Kareem turned his head. Alara Wynn stood near the doorway, hands folded at her waist, posture straight but tired. The cold had reddened her cheeks. Her brown hair was pulled back as usual, though loose strands framed her face now, escaping discipline just as the night before had escaped control. Kareem studied her for a long moment. You didn't save me because I deserved it, he said quietly, his voice thin but steady. You saved me because you are not like me. There was no apology in his tone, no request for forgiveness. Just acknowledgement, cold, precise, unsettling in its clarity. Alara met his gaze. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The doors closed behind him, and Kareem Nadir disappeared down the snow-packed path, bound for courtrooms and cells instead of forests and guns. Inside, the clinic felt different. Not restored, changed. Captain Hazel Grant stood at the central desk, reviewing reports with a focus that bordered on stubborn resolve. In daylight, she looked even leaner, her sharp features carved by years of command and responsibility. Her short blonde hair was immaculate as always, her uniform crisp despite the chaos it had endured. They're going to ask questions, Hazel said, without looking up. They already are. Alara nodded. About the medical decisions, and about why you were allowed to make them, Hazel added. She finally looked up then, her pale eyes steady. I've made it clear in my report. You followed protocol under extreme circumstances. You acted to preserve life. Ilara let out a slow breath. Thank you. Hazel shook her head. Don't thank me. This isn't personal. It's accurate. Aiden Cross stood a few steps away, arms loosely crossed, his presence as unobtrusive as it was constant. In daylight, with the tension eased, he looked like what he was, a man shaped by service rather than defined by it. The faded olive-gray combat shirt clung to his frame, softened by wear. His boots were scuffed and practical. The old military watch on his wrist ticked steadily, indifferent to everything that had happened. Hazel glanced at him. You gave a statement? Yes. You didn't embellish? No. She nodded, satisfied. Good. Dr. Mason Rourke sat alone on a bench near the back wall. Without the pressure of guns and threats, he looked smaller. His shoulders were slumped, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. His thinning hair was damp with sweat, despite the warmth of the clinic. When Ilara approached, he looked up quickly, eyes rimmed with red. I keep replaying it, Mason said. All the times I chose speed over care, obedience over judgment. Ilara sat beside him, leaving a careful space between them. Fear has a way of convincing us it's logic. Mason swallowed. I don't know if I'd make a different choice next time. Ilara considered that. Knowing that, she said, is the beginning of a different answer. He nodded slowly, not relieved, but thoughtful, burdened with something heavier than fear now, responsibility. By mid-morning, the clinic staff gathered briefly in the main room. Hazel addressed them without ceremony. We're instituting a new standing protocol, she said, effective immediately. She paused, letting the words settle. Any person in this facility, medical, military, civilian, who identifies a credible danger signal has the authority to call a 10-second stop. Murmurs rippled through the room. No rank override, Hazel continued. No debate. 10 seconds of silence to assess. We listen to the signal. Then we act. Ilara felt a tightness in her chest she hadn't expected. Across the room, Aiden met her eyes briefly. It wasn't pride she saw there. It was recognition. Coda lay on a padded mat near the window, his injured leg elevated and freshly treated. The fever had broken overnight. His breathing was even now, his amber eyes alert but calmer. The black and tan fur along his spine caught the sunlight, gleaming softly. A veterinary specialist from the response team knelt beside him, a middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled into a practical braid, movements gentle and assured. She checked the wound carefully, nodding with approval. He's healing, she said. Strong immune response. He'll limp for a while, but he'll recover. Aiden crouched beside Coda, resting a hand against the dog's neck. The warmth there was steady, reassuring. Good work, he murmured. Coda's tail thumped once against the mat. Ilara watched them from a distance, struck again by the quiet symmetry between the two-man and animal bound not by commands, but by trust tested repeatedly under fire. As Ilara turned to gather her things, Coda lifted his head and looked directly at her. Not past her, at her. For a brief moment, the noise of the clinic faded. The conversations, the footsteps, the radios. His gaze held hers with an intensity that made her stop mid-step. It wasn't fear. It wasn't warning. It was something closer to recognition. Then, He lowered his head again, satisfied, as if a question had been answered. The afternoon passed with debriefs and paperwork, with statements recorded and equipment inventoried. The field clinic returned to its intended purpose, quiet readiness instead of forced urgency. Hazel caught Alara near the exit. "You did well," she said, "not just clinically." Alara managed a small smile. "I just did my job." Hazel tilted her head. "No, you did more than that. And it matters." Outside, Aiden waited with Coda, leash loose in his hand. The snow crunched softly underfoot as Alara joined them. They stood there for a moment, saying nothing. There was no romance in the air, no dramatic promise, only respect earned, not assumed. "I'm staying in town a bit longer," Alara said eventually. "They'll need follow-up reports, and I want to make sure the protocol sticks." Aiden nodded. "Good." She hesitated, then added, "If you need anything for him, I know where to find you," Aiden replied. That was enough. They walked away from the clinic together, boots and paws leaving parallel tracks across the snow. At the edge of the tree line, Coda stopped. He turned his head and looked back. The clinic stood quiet against the frozen lake, sunlight glinting off its windows. It looked ordinary again, just a building meant to heal. Coda watched it for a long moment, ears relaxed, body still, as if he understood that something there had ended and something else had begun. Aiden followed his gaze. "Come on," he said softly. "There are still people who need saving." Coda turned forward and walked on, the snow bright beneath their feet, the path ahead open and unwritten. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive as light from the sky or voices from heaven. Sometimes, they arrive quietly, through instinct, through courage, through a single choice to do what is right when fear demands otherwise. In this story, no one was saved because they deserved it. They were saved because someone listened to conscience, to truth, to a signal placed there by God long before the moment arrived. Faith is not always found in churches or spoken in prayers. Often, it lives in ordinary people who choose mercy over hatred, discipline over chaos, and life over convenience. Perhaps that, too, is God's work, moving through human hands when the world is at its most broken. As you return to your own life, remember this: every day, you are given moments, small, quiet moments, where your choice can protect, heal, or guide someone else. Those moments matter. Heaven notices them, even when the world does not. If this story touched you, share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what part stayed with you. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue telling stories that remind us why life is worth protecting. May God watch over you and your loved ones. May He grant you clarity in difficult choices, and may His protection follow you wherever you go.